Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. Today's movie is one of the greatest westerns ever filmed. But the driven nature of the main character, Ethan Edwards, John Wayne, is somewhat troubling to viewers, and his overt hatred for the Indians is hard for a modern audience. Rotten Tomatoes states, if John Ford is the greatest Western director, The Searchers 1956 is arguably his greatest film. At once a grand outdoor spectacle, like such Ford classics as She Wore a Yellow Ribbon 1949 and Rio Grande 1950, and a film about one man's troubling moral codes, a big screen adventure of the 1950s that anticipated the complex themes and characters that would dominate the 1970s. The great Roger Ebert says, John Ford's The Searchers contains scenes of magnificence and is one of John Wayne's best performances. There are shots that are astoundingly beautiful. A cover story in New York Magazine called it the most influential movie in American history. And yet, at its center is a difficult question. Because the Wayne character is racist without apology, and so, in a less outspoken way, are the other white characters, is this film intended to endorse their attitude or to dramatize and regret them? Ford shot this and other films in Monument Valley, Utah. It is covered with remnant volcano cones, and the relief is stark. Ford used this area effectively and showed the smallness of humans when they are set against this staggering backdrop. He also used doorways to frame people arriving and leaving. The thing that impresses me most about this movie is it is heavily based on actual historical events. I mentioned Cynthia Parker briefly in Episode 1, King Kong, 1933. Cynthia Parker's family lived on the western frontier of Texas in 1834 or 35. Cynthia was around 10 years old at the time the family moved. Her extended family built a stockade to defend against Comanche raids. The Comanches were a fierce West Texas tribe that had soundly defeated the Spanish and the Mexicans. Did you ever wonder why the Mexican government was inviting American settlers to come to Texas? Well, one of the reasons was the Comanches. The Mexican government wanted the Anglos as a buffer. In 1836, a mostly Comanche raiding party attacked Fort Parker. Cynthia was taken as a captive around the age of 11. 5 other people were captured with Cynthia, and all of them escaped or were ransomed back to their family. In all, Cynthia spent 24 or 25 years with the Comanches and married a tribal leader and had 3 children. Her eldest son, Quanah Parker, became the last free chief of the Comanches. The entire time she was gone, Cynthia's father kept lobbying and paying for search parties. In 1860, a group of Texas Rangers found Cynthia and freed her after a battle with the band. She was around 34 years old and had a 2-year-old daughter with her. Oddly, her father did not take her in, and she went to live with her uncle, hanging Judge Isaiah Parker. Her cousins became her legal guardians. Then she went to live with her brother until he left for the Civil War, and then finally to her sister and brother-in-law's home. Cynthia was never happy back in Anglo society and didn't understand why she was of such importance to other people. In 1864, her daughter became ill and died. Cynthia went into a grief spiral and eventually died herself in 1871. So why were the Texans able to fight off the Comanches when others couldn't? Well, thank Samuel Colt. The Texas Rangers were armed with Colt Patterson revolvers during the Mexican War for Independence. Around the time of the Mexican-American War, Texas Ranger Samuel Walker worked with Samuel Colt to design the Walker Colt. This multi-shot power weapon was used to great effect against the Comanches, had a style of riding rings until the single-shot guns fired and then charged in before they could reload. This didn't work well against the 6-shot Colt, and eventually the power of the Comanches was broken. For my first book recommendation ever, you should read all about the above in Empire of the Summer Moon, Quanah Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches, the most powerful Indian tribe in American history, by S.C. Gwynn. This movie also has a big Star Wars connection that I will mention at the end of the review. So let's get on to the actors, and there are a lot. Actors. John Wayne played Ethan Edwards, the uncle of kidnapped Debbie Edwards. Wayne was first covered in Chisholm, 1970. Jeffrey Hunter played a 1/8 Cherokee adoptee, found by Ethan and raised by the Edwards, and he was named Martin Pauly. Hunter was covered in The Great Locomotive Chase, 1956. Vera Miles was Laura Jorgensen, the love interest of Martin Pauly and some others. Miles was covered in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. Ward Bond played a Reverend and Captain of the Texas Rangers, Reverend Captain Samuel Johnson Clayton. Bond was first covered in It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. John Quallen was in the role of Lars Jorgensen, father to Laura. Quallen was first covered in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. Laurie's mother was masterfully played by Olive Carey as Miss Jorgensen. Carey was first introduced in Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Harry Carey Jr. played the role of Brad Jorgensen, who is in love with Lucy Edwards. Carey Jr. was introduced in Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Hank Worden played crazy Indian fighter Mose Harper. We first talked about Worden in The Alamo, 1960. Ken Curtis played Charlie McCrory, a love interest of Laura's. Curtis was first introduced in The Alamo, 1960. Patrick Wayne had a very small role as Lieutenant Greenhill. This Wayne was first introduced during the Green Beret, 1968. Natalie Wood played the kidnapped Debbie Edwards at around age 15. Natalie Wood was born in San Francisco in 1938. She was the child of Russian immigrants. Wood got her first acting role at the age of 4 in Happy Land, 1943. The family moved to Los Angeles, hoping to get more work for their beautiful daughter. After flunking her first screen test, on her second try, the 7-year-old Wood finally was cast in Miracle on 34th Street, 1947. American audiences were in love with the little girl, and she made 18 more movies as a child actress. At the age of 16, Wood was cast in a generationally important film, Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, playing the bad girl hanging out with the wrong crowd. She stood out among this young cast of James Dean, Dennis Hopper, and Sal Mineo and earned her first Oscar nomination. Great roles came pouring in and included Splendor in the Grass, 1961, West Side Story, 1961, playing a Puerto Rican, Gypsy, 1962, where her mother got her a job stripping, and Love with the Proper Stranger, 1963. She was nominated for an Oscar for Splendor in the Grass, 1961, and Love with the Proper Stranger, 1963. Following This Property is Condemned, 1966, Wood took 3 years off. When she returned, it was to the hit Bob and Carol and Ted and Atlas, 1969. She slowed her pace and did more television. Wood made The Last Married Couple in America, 1980, and started production on Brainstorm, 1983, with Christopher Walken. On November 29, 1981, Wood was sailing with her husband, Robert Wagner, and friend Christopher Walken. At some point, she fell into the water and drowned. There have been persistent rumors about foul play, but nothing has proven to be true. German-born Henry Brandon played the role of Indian kidnapper Scar. His family moved to America shortly after his birth in 1912. He eventually studied at the Pasadena Playhouse and began mostly playing the heavies in films. He worked with Laurel and Hardy in Babes in Toyland, 1934, played Fu Manchu in Drums of Fu Manchu, 1943, played a good guy in Black Legion, 1937 with Humphrey Bogart, played Acacius Page in Anti-Mame, 1958, and a British major in The Buccaneer, 1958. He played an Indian chief 2 times in director John Ford's films, The Searchers, 1956, and Two Rode Together, 1961. When he died in 1990, Brandon had 175 film and television credits. Beulah Archuleta played an accidentally married Indian woman named Look. She was born in 1913. Archuleta had a total of 31 film and television credits in mostly small roles and in many as an Indian. However, she was in some important movies such as The Searchers, 1956, Key Largo 1948, and How the West Was Won 1962. She died in 1969 at the age of 57. Pippa Scott played the other kidnapped girl, Lucy Edwards. Pippa was born in 1935 in New York City.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Her mother was an actress and writer, while her father had something to do with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire movies. Her uncle was also a writer and producer. Pippa was educated at Radcliffe, the Southern California Institute of Architecture in California, and trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. Pippa went right into Broadway work. Her first film was The Searchers 1956. Pippa was outstanding as a secretary in Auntie Mame 1958. Pippa made films, produced, and worked in theater. She was a founding partner of Lorimar Productions, a television company responsible for The Waltons 1971, Dallas 1978-91, Falcon Crest 1981 to 1990, Knots Landing 1979 to 1993, Eight is Enough 1977 to 1981, and The Blue Knight 1975 to 76, just to name a few. Later she worked with film to aid the War Crimes Tribunal of the United Nations. Lana Wood, the real sister of Natalie Wood, played the younger Debbie Edwards. The primary requirement for getting the job was that John Wayne could lift her up. Following on the heels of her older sister, Lana made her debut with her sister in Driftwood 1947, but her scenes were cut. Her first real credit came for The Searchers 1956. Lana worked more in television than her sibling. She eventually made it on to Peyton Place 1964 to 68. She played the bad girl to her sister's good girl image and made movies like For Singles Only 1968 and Screen Free 1969, a drug story that featured Russ Tamblyn. She was also on almost all the early 1960s television shows. In 1971, Lana posed for Playboy magazine to reignite her career. She got the role of Plenty O'Toole in Diamonds Are Forever 1971 with super hunk Sean Connery. Somehow, after all this, she landed a Disney role in Justin Morgan Had a Horse 1972. Through the 1970s, she was in a lot of television movies, but her career was really trailing off. Lana spent almost 2 decades away from movies and television, but has now returned and has been making films. Story: a woman opens the door and looks out onto the vast frontier. It has been 3 years since the end of the Civil War. The rest of the family of Texans come outside as a lone rider approaches. Finally, the father, Aaron, Walter Coy, says, "Ethan?" The man on the horse is Aaron's brother Ethan, John Wayne. He is still wearing his Confederate coat with a red sergeant's rank, so it can be presumed that he was in artillery. We are never told where Ethan has been, but since Maximilian, the French Emperor of Mexico, fell the year before, it can be assumed he was there working as a mercenary. Well, thanks for Cinco de Mayo anyway. Ethan meets the 3 children, Lucy, Ben, and Debbie. He also seems to look at his sister-in-law, Martha, Dorothy Jordan, a little too longingly. Martin, Jeffrey Hunter, comes home and receives a cool reception from Ethan. Ethan is unhappy that Martin is there, even though he is the one that found him as a baby after his family was killed. After supper, Ethan gives little Debbie a Mexican medal. In reality, the medal is an order of Saint Sava from the Kingdom of Serbia. After the kids go to bed, Ethan throws gold coins and Union cash to his brother when Aaron asks him about leaving. The next morning, the Texas Rangers arrive, and among the members are Reverend Captain Samuel Clayton, Ward Bond, Lars Jorgensen, John Quallen, who had his cattle stolen, Charlie McCrory, Ken Curtis, and crazy Indian fighter Mose Harper, Hank Warden, who was based on a real, half-crazy Indian fighter that loved rocking chairs. Clayton wants to deputize Aaron and Martin into the Rangers. When Ethan comes out, the men are all impressed. Ethan says he will go in Aaron's place so Aaron can stay and protect the farm if the raid is a Comanche trick. Lucy goes outside to kiss her boyfriend, Brad Jorgensen, Harry Carey Jr. The men follow the trail, and soon Martin begins to suspect that the trail they are following has been made easy for them to follow. Ethan dismisses Martin because of his Indian ancestry. Sometime later that day, the group finds the stolen cattle. They have been slaughtered and not eaten. All of the men realize that they have been lured away from the homesteads. Most of the men head for the Jorgensen farm because it is the closest. Ethan knows the horses have to be rested and fed or they will never make the trip. Mose stays with Ethan, but he is nutty as a marsh hare. Back at the farm, Aaron hears Indian calls and sees game moving. He knows the Indians are out in the distance. They send the littlest girl, Debbie, out to hide in the family cemetery. No sooner has she made it to the grave when Scar, Henry Brandon, arrives and gives the signal to attack. Ethan and Mose, with rested horses, pass Martin on the way to Aaron's farm. His horse has died and he is on foot. They pass him by and stay focused on the mission. Early in the morning, Mose and Ethan make it to the farm and find it burning. The same shot setup was used in Star Wars 1977 when Luke's aunt and uncle were killed. There will be more about this movie's influence on Star Wars later. Ethan rides down with blood in his eyes. It's too late because Aaron and Ben have been killed. Martha has been brutalized and murdered. Lucy and Debbie are missing. Martin makes it in and wants to look at his dead aunt. However, Ethan slugs him and keeps him out. The dogs begin barking in the family cemetery and Ethan goes to investigate. He finds Debbie's doll. They have a funeral, but when it goes too long, Ethan shouts, "Amen," and starts gathering up the men to begin searching. Miss Jorgensen, Olive Carey, begs Ethan not to let the young men become obsessed with revenge if the girls can't be saved. Apparently, Martin was seeing Laurie Jorgensen, Vera Miles, not having a very deep pool to swim in. The men head out and begin trailing the Indians. Before long, they find a buried Indian. They say they found another one when they come upon this body, so apparently it's not the first they have found. Brad Jorgensen, in a fit of rage, hits the dead body with a rock. Ethan then shoots out the corpse's eyes so he can never enter the spirit world and will have to wander for eternity. The rest of the gang is kind of shocked by his hate for their enemy. Ethan rides ahead and finds the Indian camp about 20 miles away. Ethan wants to storm the camp, which will probably get the girls killed. Reverend Clayton decides to stampede the Indian ponies. The men slowly sneak towards the camp, and when they arrive, the Comanches have gone. Ethan feels that there is an ambush ahead, but they go on. The next day, a large Indian raiding party begins to trail the Rangers. The Rangers sprint to the river as the Indians give chase. The Rangers manage to make a stand on the opposite shore. The Navajo Indians that were used for the filming are a little long in the tooth. During the crossing, one of the Rangers gets hit. The Ranger that gets wounded sure seems to be Will Gear, Grandpa Walton, but I can't find a reference. Ethan keeps on shooting even after the defeated Indians are fleeing. Reverend Clayton knocks his gun away and the two men are done with each other forever. Since the Rangers have to take the wounded man back, Ethan says he is heading on alone. Martin and Brad say they are going along, but Ethan makes it clear that he is giving all the orders. The trio follows the trail until 4 horses split off into a side canyon. Ethan follows the side trail and says he will meet the other 2 at the opposite end. When Ethan makes it back, he is very upset and his old Confederate coat is missing. He will not tell the 2 what was in the canyon. Sometime later, Brad finds the Indian camp. He says he saw Lucy in the blue dress she was wearing. This forces Ethan to tell him that an Indian is wearing the dress because he found Lucy in the side canyon, murdered and brutalized. He buried her in his Confederate coat. This truth is too much for Brad. He jumps onto a horse and rides wildly into the camp. We hear the firing of guns and know that Brad is dead. Ethan and Martin continue to track the band until a blizzard hides the trail. They head back to the Jorgensen's ranch, knowing that they will continue in the spring. They have already let the Jorgensens know by mail that Brad is dead. Laura is so happy to see Martin, she keeps kissing him and making her intentions known. The Jorgensens have been running errands, now Ethan's cattle. Ethan makes arrangements for Martin to stay and work. Lars Jorgensen finally remembers a letter he received earlier for Ethan. A trader by the name of Futterman sent a piece of cloth that was believed to be from Debbie's clothes and says he has knowledge of the tribe that took her. In the morning, Ethan leaves without Martin. Martin believes that Ethan will kill Debbie if he finds her. Laura gives Martin the letter. He decides to follow Ethan. Laura is very upset, but she gives him a horse and a gun anyway. She says she will not be waiting when he comes back. Ethan and Martin make it to Futterman's trading post. Futterman wants $1,000, but Ethan gives him $5. Futterman says the band is led by Scar and is of the Nawyechka tribe. Ethan says Futterman will get the reward when they find Debbie. That night, Martin thinks they are being followed. Ethan explains that Nawyechka means something like tricky or sly. After Martin goes to sleep, Ethan hides away from the fire. Before long, Futterman and 2 other men come sneaking towards the camp to kill and rob the searchers. Ethan shoots the 3 men in the back. Martin is upset when he finds out that Ethan used him as bait for the trap. The search goes on and it has been over a year. Laura gets a letter from Martin, delivered by her would-be suitor, Charlie McCrory. Charlie starts courting Laura. She reads the letter and narrates the next section of the story. Martin is trading blankets with a chief and accidentally buys an Indian wife named Look, Beulah Archuleta. I don't know, but it seems like they are trying to juxtapose the treatment of each race's women. While one group trades their women folks for blankets, the others travel for years trying to recover one of their women. Look follows the 2 men out of the village. When Martin finds out what he has done, he is pretty mean to her and tries to run her off. When Laura gets to the part about the wife, she throws the letter into the fire. Lars pulls it out and she keeps on reading. Ethan keeps on ribbing Martin about his wife, and finally Martin says, "Why don't you ask her about Scar?" Martin has been warned not to talk about what they are doing in front of the Indians, and Look overhears. She denies knowing anything and runs away. The snow sets in and they can't track her. Later, the men find a herd of buffalo and start hunting. Suddenly, Ethan is trying to kill the entire herd so that no Comanche can feed off them during the winter. Martin tries to stop him, but they are both halted by the sound of bugles. An army cavalry troop has attacked a Comanche village and killed most of the people there. Martin and Ethan find the dead body of Look in one of the teepees. This is most reminiscent of the Sand Creek Massacre, where Colorado U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, consisting of almost 700 men, attacked a village, killing between 70 and 163 Native Americans, of whom about 2/3 were women and children. The soldiers also scalped and mutilated the bodies. In the non-movie timeline, this would have taken place about 4 years before Ethan and Martin started their trip. They decide that it is Scar's tribe, and they head out to find the soldiers. Of course, the troops are playing Gary Owens so that they will be associated with George Armstrong Custer and the U.S. 7th Cavalry. But the Little Bighorn was not until 1876. Ethan and Martin go to a fort where some women that have been rescued from the Comanche are being held. The women have all been driven insane by their experience. They figure that Debbie is 14. They see the girls her age, and one of them snatches Debbie's doll from Martin and rocks back and forth holding it. Ethan has a look of horror, thinking what they might find when they get to Debbie. Meanwhile, Laurie finishes the letter and is disgusted with Martin for not being romantic. Charlie begins singing to her. The men have had almost a 5-year journey by the time they head into New Mexico territory. They run into Mose in a little cantina. Mose says he has met a trader that sometimes barters with Scar's group. Senor Figueroa takes the men to meet Scar. Ethan and Scar know who each other are, and the hate is palpable. The men trade barbs inside of the teepee until they see that Debbie, now played by her older sister Natalie Wood, is one of Scar's wives when she is called to show the scalps Scar has collected. Honor prevents Scar from killing Ethan and Martin as they are guests. Ethan says that he and Martin will camp on the other side of the creek and trade the next day. Figueroa and his men leave so they will not get in the middle of a blood feud. Ethan and Martin are in their camp when Debbie comes running down the hill. Martin runs to her, asking her to remember. She says she does, but the Comanche are her people now. Ethan pulls his gun and is about to shoot Debbie, thinking she would be better off dead than as a Comanche. Martin stands in the way. Suddenly, Ethan is hit in the shoulder with an arrow as Scar and his band attack. Ethan and Martin escape, and a running battle takes place until the 2 men find shelter in a cave. They hold off Scar's attack. Later, as Martin tries to treat Ethan's infected wound, Ethan gives him a will, leaving everything to Martin. Martin gets mad and says Debbie is Ethan's kin. Ethan tells Martin that one of the scalps in the teepee was Martin's mother. Ethan and Martin make it back to the Jorgensen's ranch, and everyone is gathering for a wedding between Laurie and Charlie. When Lars sees Ethan, he warns him not to enter the house as there are warrants for the murder of the traitor Futterman. Ethan walks into the house anyway. Everyone is dancing, and one group of men are the famous stuntmen Chuck Hayward, Terry Wilson, John Hudkin, Fred Kennedy, Frank McGrath, and Chuck Robertson, IMDb.com. Ethan goes for a drink, and his two stunt doubles from the movie, Hayward and Wilson, join him. Outside, Martin sees Laurie in her wedding dress. He is more upset when he finds out that she is marrying Charlie. Charlie and Martin get into a fight, but make up at the end. Reverend Clayton is getting ready to arrest Ethan when young cavalry Lieutenant Greenhill, Patrick Wayne, arrives with Mose. Mose was captured by Scar's band, but managed to escape when they got near the Jorgensen's ranch. The Ranger Company plus Ethan and Martin plan to ride out after Scar in the morning. Ethan and Clayton want to charge into the camp, hoping Debbie will be killed. Martin forces them to let him go in and rescue her. He sneaks into the camp and finds her in the teepee. Scar comes in, and in a fight, Martin kills him. Martin's gunshots start the battle. When Ethan finds the dead Scar, he scalps him. Debbie runs away, knowing her uncle wants to kill her. Martin tries to stop him, but he rides her down. But instead of killing her, he picks her up and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." Ethan and Martin take Debbie to the Jorgensen's ranch, where Lars and his wife welcome her in. Laurie and Martin go in as well. Ethan turns away and is framed by the door like when he was first seen. He grabs his elbow with the opposite hand in a tribute to Harry Carey Sr. Then the door closes on Ethan. Some of Ethan's hate is made clear by looking at the grave marker where little Debbie hides early in the film. The stone reads, "Here lies Mary Jane Edwards, killed by Comanches May 12, 1852, a good wife and mother in her 41st year." It has also been reported that Ethan's constant use of the phrase, "That'll be the day," in the movie led Buddy Holly to write his hit song by the same name. Star Wars 1977, and to a lesser degree The Wizard of Oz 1939, share many parallels with The Searchers 1956. Both Luke and Dorothy live on an isolated farm in an arid place. The farm kids become heroes. Of course, in The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch took the place of Darth Vader. Dorothy, the Scarecrow, C-3PO, the Tin Man, R2-D2, and the Cowardly Lion, Wookiee, only killed to further their goals and never went with revenge. In the opinion of Tim Roby, several films follow the plot line of the main character becoming obsessed with the quest and losing his moral compass. It is at the heart of many movies such as The Yakuza 1974, Taxi Driver 1976, Hardcore 1979, and The Wind and the Lion 1975. Jesse Percival ties the space film into the Western genre. Percival says that Akira Kurosawa, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg were all heavily influenced by John Ford's directing. Percival states that the filming style and the use of landscapes are the same in The Searchers 1956 as in the Tatooine scenes in Star Wars 1977. Both farms are destroyed by fire after a ruthless attack and are filmed in a similar manner. The Searchers 1956 line picks up again in Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones 2002. Anakin returns to where his mother has been killed by Tusken Raiders. He goes on a killing spree. Tim Roby states that while Ethan was somewhat justified, Anakin had no justification for his killing because he could not bring her back. World famous short summary: two men with an overdeveloped sense of revenge. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's show. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and just about everything else. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. Please take the time to jump over to iTunes and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.